Okay, sorry for technical interruptions. Hello everyone, welcome to Artificial Intelligence Association of Lithuania meetup. And this meetup is quite different. So as you know, we organized this year AI Awards. And in these awards, we have like several nominations. So people nominated for different categories, which is research paper, biggest innovation, biggest communication event that like promote AI in Lithuania. And before we start, I want to introduce myself. My name is Davidas Malačiūnas. I am a board member of Artificial Intelligence Association of Lithuania. And today we have 7 papers and 6 speakers. So all these sessions are recorded because all researchers are in different places around the world, so it would be hard to put them together in one meeting. So, but we glad that we have all pre-recordings, like 10 minutes introductions about the paper. But before we start, I want to get to mic to Linas Petkevičius, which is also board member of Artificial Intelligence Association of Lithuania and the main organizer of AI Awards. So Linai, can you hear me?
Yes. So hello everyone. It's really nice to first time organize such kind of the review of really amazing research papers that our colleagues from all over the world organized and published this year. And once we hear all the presentations, I really suggest for you to try to join the both events. In this case, the AI Awards in the December 28th, either on the YouTube translation or on site in Vilnius. And also for multiple awards categories, please vote to select the best company of the year in the field of AI. The best publications will be selected by the committee of the voters. And finally, there will be multiple other awards, like for the lifetime achievements in the field of AI. Also, there will be award for the best information in all the area in Lithuania, and also the final award will be about the best applications in all the sectors in Lithuania. So in this case, there's multiple categories, and we really would like that you would vote on those categories and eventually would participate in the AI awards. So that's the message from us. And today, please listen for the best publications, for the nominees for the best publications of the year in the field of AI.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Linas. And we maybe can start. So before we start, I want to make honorable mentions. So it's not all the papers, but we maybe in the future have bigger list with all the papers around the year with people from Lithuania represent. So, but today we want to mention a couple of them. So Evgeny Gemper with paper multiple instance caption learning representation from his topology textbooks and articles. Then Ignas Buivytis with hierarchical kinematic probability distribution for 3D human shape and pose estimation from image in the wild. And Povilas Daniušis, topological navigation graph framework. So this is not all of the papers from Lithuania, but we put more papers maybe in some kind of list or something where you can read. Okay, so let's start with our first paper nominated for the Best Paper Award of 2021. So it's from Biometric Design. And the main author is Donatas Repecka, and paper called Expanding Functional Protein Sequence Spaces Using Generative Adversarial Networks. So let's hear Donatas' presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Donatas. I'm CTO at Biomatter Designs, a company developing and applying solutions in the field of protein engineering. Today, I'm presenting a paper published in Nature Machine Intelligence in 2021. This research is a joint effort between Biomatter Designs as well as Vilnius and Chalmers universities. The main aim of our work was to explore deep learning capabilities to generate new functional protein variants, which hasn't been demonstrated before. The ability to create functional proteins at will is one of the holy grails in synthetic biology. Such advancement will have unprecedented implications in a wide range of areas, such as personalized healthcare or environmentally friendly manufacturing. Unfortunately, the task at hand is largely unsolved. The protein engineering is extremely complex, as the combinatorial space is enormously vast, and underlying mechanisms are not fully understood yet. To put this in perspective, a small-sized protein comprising 100 amino acids can be made in 10 to the power of 130 unique ways. In such a vast space, as little as 1 out of 10 to the power 77 sequences are estimated to fall into defined 3D structures to carry out specific functions. Furthermore, the most accurate computational design tools are computationally expensive to run and require structure of the target protein, which is extremely expensive to obtain experimentally. While predicted and model structures could be used instead, this comes at the expense of the accuracy. Even then, the results of computational tools are often subpar. Also, the large part of protein engineering is performed in the laboratory, which can take years and many failed attempts to arrive to desired target. Not to mention the high financial burden associated with the experimental work. Our work concentrated on developing a specialized version of GAN, which is capable of capturing and replicating underlying patterns found in natural sequences. During the study, we have developed and tested multiple novel GAN architectures. This involved experimenting with a variety of model layers, losses, up and down sampling techniques, optimization methods, training procedures, and hyperparameters. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, for full details, I refer you to the paper. However, I would like to draw attention to two major challenges we have addressed in order to adopt the GAN principle in the context of protein engineering. More specifically, end-to-end differentiability and convergence. The protein sequences are made of 20 different amino acids, which means that we need to find a way to enable gradient flow through the discrete latent variables. To overcome such an issue, we implemented Gumbel softmax relaxation with temperature annealing that replaces non-differentiable categorical samples with differentiable approximation during the training. The second challenge is related to inherited instability of GANs, which has been further aggravated by the discrete nature of data. We have confirmed findings of Mesher et al. Paper that claims that unregularized GAN training is not always convergent. The distribution are not absolutely continuous, which is the case with protein sequences. By implementing a gradient penalty term called R1, we have managed to stabilize training and leave it running for weeks. As you can see in the figure on the right, the same non-saturating loss without R2 regularization term fails to produce sequences even remotely similar to the natural ones measured by Blossom 45, which is a measure of protein sequence similarity. On the other hand, the version with the regularization term clearly outperforms not only original non-saturating loss, but also all other losses as well. In silico analysis of our final train model showed that the model learned to replicate patterns observed in natural sequences. More specifically, the Shannon entropy of each position demonstrated an overall high correlation, Pearson being approximately 0.9, while conventional models based on first-order HMM perform poorly. The same performance gap has been observed when analyzing amino acid pair correlations. For more in-depth comparison and analysis, please refer to the paper. In addition, we have uncovered that some of the latent variables are highly correlated with protein properties. For example, flexibility of specific structure parts in the protein, or hydrophobicity, which indicates that protein GAN could be potentially used to generate proteins with desired properties. For example, less flexible proteins are usually more stable and can be used in industrial manufacturing processes where harsh reaction conditions are common, while protein hydrophobicity can be helpful when using the enzyme in more hydrophobic solvents than water, for example, methanol. In spite of thorough in silico protein sequence analysis, the only unambiguous way to determine whether the novel generated proteins are functional is to perform experimental testing. For that, we selected a 350 amino acid long enzyme called maltodehydrogenase, or MDH for short, that is responsible for conversion of malate to oxaloacetic in various organisms. While details of the selected protein is not important, it's worth noting that the selected protein is representative in terms of complexity of real-life proteins used in industry. We have generated 55 MDH sequences which have been synthesized and experimentally characterized in the laboratory by our collaborators. 24% of generated sequences catalyze the desired reaction, while containing up to 106 substitutions compared to the closest natural sequences. To put this in perspective, a single mutation has 70% chance of having negative impact on protein performance. Nevertheless, generated sequences not only folded and performed the desired function, but the activity of some sequences was comparable to their the new line of research. Researchers from both academia and industry have applied this algorithm and modified it further to generate new natural-looking antibodies and potent antimicrobial peptides. Whilst this still requires more fundamental and applied research, it has shown that deep learning algorithms can augment the current bioinformatic approaches and elevate our protein design capabilities, which then can be used to solve outstanding challenges of humanity. Thank you, AI Association, for this honor to present our paper, and thank you all for listening.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Donatas. And the next paper in the same field as biometric design. So I'm really glad that Lithuanian working on protein structures. So our second paper is by Justas Dauparas, researcher from University of Washington, and his paper accurate prediction of protein structures and interaction using free track neural networks. So just listen his presentation.
Sveiki, mano vardas Justas Dauparas, aš esu podoktorantas baltymų dizaino institute Vašingtone ir šiandien pristatysiu publikaciją apie baltymų struktūros nustatymą. Hello everyone, my name is Justas, and today I'm going to present a paper on accurate prediction of protein structures and interactions using a three-track neural network. This work was published in Science, and it is known as Rosetta fold. So proteins are linear chains of amino acids, as indicated here, and there is an alphabet of 20 amino acids that forms a structure. So as a simplification, you can think about the secondary structure, so alpha helix and beta sheet that form hydrogen bonds, and then those secondary structures interact to make a tertiary structure, and then tertiary structure interacts to make quaternary structure. So the final goal is, given a sequence, predict the final structure. So there's this competition called CASP, or also known as Protein Olympics, that provides an independent mechanism to assess different methods to predict protein structures. And the idea is that given a protein sequence, for example, in this case, the ORF8 protein from coronavirus, one has to return XYZ coordinates of all the atoms. In this case, there are 2 chains. So it's quite a number of atoms, and also provide the uncertainty about different atoms. As a simplification, you can think about just like a cartoon of the backbone of the protein, predicting beta sheet interactions and loops and the chain interactions themselves. Protein backbone, so as a simple task is to predict the protein backbone, so I'm going to just talk about the protein backbone prediction. The protein backbones are repetitions of 3 atoms, so nitrogen, carbon, alpha, C alpha, and then another carbon, and so on, and they are going in a chain. There are lots of different restrictions between the atoms, so bond lengths and angles are restricted, but the bonds you can think of like they can rotate, so these are the hedral angles. And as another simplification, you can think of this like a chain that needs to be predicted. To predict using a single sequence is quite difficult, so often multiple sequence alignment is built. What does that mean? Is that given a target sequence, one uses sort of like hidden Markov models to search for related sequences and also align them so that there's a target sequence and then other related sequences. In this slide that I borrowed from Sergei Ovchinnikov, it's a good illustration. If given, say, a target sequence, the top sequence, we search for related sequences. It might be the case where one amino acid is conserved in all the sequences, in all the species. So that is an important sign that this has to be here. But then some amino acids are co-evolving. What does that mean is that if the blue mutates to yellow, the yellow mutates to blue. So there's some pattern between them. So they might be actually close in 3D space, which is very useful information. Some other amino acids could be randomly, they're not important at all for structure. So learning protein structure is like learning a protein graph. So given amino acids, one has to learn a fully connected graph and determine what are the distances or what are the XYZ coordinates between different amino acids. There is data available in Protein Data Bank, about 200,000 examples available, and there'll be a supervised task to do this. So previous state-of-the-art methods used sort of like a distance prediction, for example, was Rosetta from our lab and AlphaFold. The idea is to take target sequence and multiple sequence alignment, and then use inverse covariance matrix or fit a Markov random model. And then, given these features, in this case, the first amino acid is QECL, so QECL by QECL, so think of the graph edges. These features, initial features, are being transformed using a deep residual network, and then the final features are obtained, and then those can be projected maybe to distances, and those distances can be used as restraints using gradient descent to find the final coordinates. And in this case, I'm showing, for example, the interaction between the residue Q and C in green, so that would mean this distance in the graph. However, in CAPS14, AlphaFold 2 came up with a method that outperformed everyone else by quite a lot. And the second and third place is from our lab that we use residual networks. In their case, they use the attention-based network. So this is a CASP performance using this GDT score, which is maximum is 100. So they're reaching the performance of close to 90, which is close to the actual accuracy of the experiments. During the conference, they presented their paper and showed how multiple sequence alignment is used and sometimes templates, and that there are edge features and node features and information is being exchanged. And there's this structure module that predicts the final 3D coordinates end to end rather than predicting distances, and that they use 3D equivariant transformer architecture to do the refinement. So we listened to all of these ideas, and we wanted to see if we can replicate and get a similar result. There was this paper published by Fabian Fuchs called SC3 equivariant transformers. So what they use is some sort of like kernels using spherical harmonics to build equivariant networks. So with Fabian, we wrote this little paper on iterative SC3 transformers where we backpropagate through the kernels and the network itself to do iterative sort of like refinement and some toy tasks. But then these ideas got translated into the Rosetta fold. So this is a 3-track network. Inspiration is coming from AlphaFold to try to replicate that. So we have the 1D track, which is this multiple sequence alignment, or you can think of the node features for the graph, and then these distance type or edge features that are exchanging information. And then at some point, we build the actual 3D structure, and we have this 3D track that, using a C3 transformer, we can update so that the network knows about the actual 3D embedding of these distances, and the information is exchanged, and then we get the final structure. The results that we get is our Rosetta fold outperforms by quite a lot our previous best method, green, but it was still slightly behind AlphaFold 2. And we're still working on improving it. This method can be used to predict complex structures. So for example, the experimental structures on the left and the predictors on the right. These are 3 different chains. So we can predict complex structures using discontinuous crops, and there's some other ideas how to make it better. So the code is available on the GitHub, and there's a collab available to try the method. Also, if someone wants to read more about AlphaFold 2 equivariants and proteins, check out my blog post. And then I would like to thank Minkyang, who worked on the main part of the network, and Frank and I worked on the structure module. Ivan helped with the data set, Fabian with the SC3 transformer, and Sergey and David for guidance. And then there's lots of other people part of the paper. And if anyone has any questions, please email me at justas@uw.edu. And thank you. Ačiū visiems.
Thank you, Justas. So we go further. So the next paper is by Kamila Stankeviciute from University of Cambridge, and the paper called Conformal Time Series Forecasting, which was representing, if I'm not mistaken, last week at NeurIPS conference.
And today I will talk about conformal time series forecasting, which is a paper that appeared at the NeurIPS conference last week. And this was part of my master's thesis at the University of Oxford, and it has been supervised by Dr. Ahmed Alaa and Professor Mihaela van der Schaar at the universities of Cambridge and UCLA. Motivation of our lab is applying artificial intelligence and machine learning to healthcare settings. And in this particular case, our motivation was clinical time series forecasting. Because essentially, a time series, both at the small scale and the large scale, are at the core of any clinical data sets. Because at the large scale, it's a set of electronic health records over patient visits over time. And on the smaller scale, it might be a patient being admitted to the ICU with their vital signs tracked over high frequencies. And in making an optimal decision about the patient treatment or trying to predict their survival, we usually care beyond the current state of the patient. We actually want to account for the entire history and when did the conditions develop, how did they evolve, at what frequencies do they change, and which is why the time series are super important. And so we will focus on the forecasting problem of the future outcomes. And point predictions, which are generally issued by most neural networks, are not enough, because unlikely scenarios, such as adverse effects of a drug, might be more serious than the most likely predicted outcomes. So a drug may do more harm than the benefit of my brain, and the doctor might want to account for this potential case of the adverse effect. And therefore, the model needs to provide some notion of uncertainty about its own predictions. But at the same time, it can't come up with the arbitrary intervals for uncertainty, because they have to mean something and they have to be theoretically bounded. So the errors that the model makes have to mean something to the doctor. For example, in this case, we will bound the error rate to a specific level, let's say 10%, and that means that in 90% of the cases, the uncertainty interval that the model comes up with will contain the true prediction. So this is the sort of guarantees we're talking about. And here's a toy example capturing this problem pretty well. Suppose we track the patient's white blood cell count after they have been admitted to the hospital. And there are a few things to say about the white blood cell count. We don't want it to be too high, because if the white blood cell count is too high, that means that the patient is going through a severe infection and needs urgent care and treatment. At the same time, the white blood cell count can't be too low, because that makes the patient more susceptible to further infections and also makes it harder for the patient to fight the infection. So we need the white blood cell count to be in a controlled range. And suppose after 2 days after being admitted to the hospital, a patient develops a very high white blood cell count. And we want to explore whether it's worth prescribing an antibiotic. So we forecast the patient response over the next 5 days. And had the doctor only had the point forecast, which is this middle curve here, the most likely forecasted response indicates that the white blood cell count is stable, and so it is safe to prescribe the drug as it is. However, the adverse reactions are also possible for this particular patient, because this particular patient might overreact to the prescribed dose of the antibiotic, and if the model does not provide any sort of uncertainty on the predictions that it's making, the doctor can't make a well-informed decision. And if the full prediction interval was available, then the doctor can account for those adverse effects, and they might reconsider changing the drug, lowering the dose, and so on. And this applies to many other high-stakes time series applications beyond medical ones, so it might be stock service, demand forecasting, and so on. And there are a number of approaches that have tried to tackle this problem before, and one of them is Bayesian neural networks, which model the uncertainty through parameter distributions, but that usually requires architectural changes, and if it doesn't, if it's done in an approximate way, because it's impossible to do it in fully correctly and exactly, so the approximations lose the theoretical guarantees, so actually lose the kind of real meaning of those bounds that are produced. Similarly, with the Quantile recurrent neural networks, which learn the upper and lower bounds directly, these require a lot of samples, because we're now learning two curves. To learn them correctly, we need a lot of data, but medical data sets are usually super small. And again, we have no guarantees on model errors. There are approaches which combine the neural networks with probabilistic models, such as Markov chains, and these do provide possibly theoretical guarantees, but these have sometimes unrealistic assumptions. So, for example, Markov assumption states that the future state of the patient only depends on the current state, and the entire history can be ignored, which does not hold in practice. And certain other frequentist-based approaches, which model uncertainty through resampling of the data sets, can also provide theoretical guarantees, but they're also very computationally challenging. So the approach that we propose does try to address all of the challenges above. So it can be used on top of any underlying forecasting architecture. And although we use RNNs, we can use any model that produces a points time series forecast. So it deals with the problem of architectural changes. It is a distribution-free method, so as long as we assume that the patients can be admitted in any order, which is pretty realistic, because they don't depend on each other, this method can work on pretty much any data set. So it deals with the assumptions about what types of data we might see. Also, this model provides finite sample validity guarantees, and it's a pretty efficient method. So it both deals with the computational challenges, but also does provide theoretical guarantees. So it and on the small data sets. So it addresses kind of all dimensions dimensions of this very difficult and very important problem. And the details of the model are in the paper, so you might want to check that out. So as you can see, our model is the only one to achieve the target coverage of 90%, while the multi-quantile RNN needs a lot of data to achieve those target bounds. And at the same time, the interval widths might be very narrow. So for example, with the dropout recurrent neural network, these intervals are very narrow, but at the same time, these narrow intervals don't mean anything because they also don't provide the uncertainty guarantees. And at the same time, with more data, our model does make the intervals more narrow. So it kind of tries to be as efficient as possible while maintaining the theoretical guarantees. And we applied it to the real-world medical data sets of different properties, and we discovered that our proposed model is the only model to maintain the required coverage. So we had a target coverage of 90%, and conformal forecasting RNN was the only one to get even close to that. It does make the intervals wider. So for example, in the COVID-19 data set, you can see that the intervals are wider, but perhaps that this is exactly what is necessary for the model to bound its probability of error, because it might come up with the narrow intervals, but actually, which might be actually misleading, such as the case is here. So we saw that our model works pretty well, and so as I mentioned, you can see further details in our paper. You can also check out the code at the GitHub repository and take a look at our website for further information on applications of the time series in healthcare. Thank you so much. Hello?
Yep, thank you, Camilla. Yeah, we can go further. Our next two papers from Gintarė Karolina Džiugaitė, researcher at Google Brain. And in one video, we have two papers represented. So first one is the methods and analysis of the first competition in predicting generalization of deep learning. And the second one is on the role of data in Baek. Okay, so let's hear the talk by Gintarė.
Sveiki, mano vardas Gintarė Karolina Džiugaitė. Šiandieną aš pristatinėsiu savo darbus on the generalization in deep learning and the role of data in Baek. So in my work, I focus on understanding deep learning. And in particular, I work on understanding generalization in deep learning. There are a lot of exotic notions of generalization: future learning, transfer learning, distribution shift. In this talk, I'll be focusing on arguably the simplest notion of generalization, which is in-distribution generalization. And I ask, why does deep learning generalize in distribution? And how can we test generalization theories empirically? So there's this yet no satisfying theory explaining why over-parameterized neural networks trained with stochastically in descent generalize from training data to test data on standard benchmarks. And without a solid foundation, we have little chance of understanding and taming more complex phenomena such as outer-distribution generalization. This gap between practice and understanding is a growing liability as we start incorporating deep learning in high-stake applications such as self-driving cars and healthcare data. So in this talk, I'll briefly describe a couple of my recent papers on the topics around evaluating generalization theories, and I will talk about one specific theory. Over the last 5 years, we made rapid progress in understanding generalization deep learning. Now we know that good generalization is a product of favorable properties of data, of the algorithm, and also the interaction between the two. And due to this dependence on the distributional properties of the data, any proposed explanation of deep learning should be evaluated empirically. And it's something that I continue to argue throughout my work over the last years. So generalization theories are often realized by generalization measures. So for example, we often have a generalization theory that gives you a bound on the difference between the test error and the training error in terms of some complexity measure that may depend on the model architecture, the data itself, the training algorithm, the weights that we've learned, and so on. And the bound is usually valid either with high probability or an expectation. So I want to reiterate that empirical evaluation of the generalization measures is absolutely critical. These complexity measures that appear in generalization theories are actually data dependent, or they contain data dependent terms. And empirical evaluation is the only way to know how these complexity measures grow, how they change as we vary the depth of the network, for example, where the bounds may fail or where they succeed, where we need to improve to make progress in our understanding. So as a follow-up on this, last year we had a NURBS competition on predicting generalization in deep learning. So there we invited the community to design general complexity measures that may or may not rely on theory, that can accurately predict the generalization of models or the change in generalization of models. And in this paper, we describe the most novel submissions, the ones that work the best and perform the best. One thing I want to highlight is that there were a lot of really creative approaches to predicting generalization, and ones that don't necessarily really appear in theory or have never been connected in theory. So for example, some of the measures, complexity measures dependent on intermediate representations or on data augmentation. So in this NURBS competition, we chose one particular way to evaluate generalization measures, which had some issues. So in my other NURBS paper, also from 2020, we also proposed a particular framework for evaluating generalization measures, and we argue why this framework is superior to others. So how should we evaluate theories of generalization empirically? Well, given a pair of networks where only one hyperparameter value changes, for example, we may vary the learning rate or vary the width of the network. We want to look for complexity measures that predict the direction of change in generalization error. One may ask, well, why should we care about having such predictors? Well, they may be useful for various reasons. First, they may help us improve our understanding of generalization. They may allow us to design better algorithms. For example, ones where we know how to control the errors, or we know how to choose hyperparameters, or we know how to not overfit on a particular subpopulation. They can also help us, better predictors can also help us do model selection. So instead of running my training procedures on massive networks multiple times on different architectures, perhaps if we have type predictors, we would be able to tell in advance or midway through whether a particular architecture is better than another architecture. I see generalization theories or predictors as lying between two extremes. On one extreme, we have very general theories that depend on very few quantities. They hold for all data distributions, any algorithm that finds a predictor minimizing the error on the training set and so on. However, it's well appreciated that such theories cannot explain generalization in deep learning. So in practice, in highly overparameterized machines, we can design a learning algorithm. We can pick a data distribution such that the performance on the training set will be great, the error will be close to zero, but the performance on the new data will be no better than chance. And that's, of course, problematic. On another extreme, we have very sharp estimates of generalization that are obtained by simply evaluating learned predictors, their performance on some held out data, such as some validation set. Of course, such an estimate is tied to the exact learned weights, to the exact data distribution, the exact trajectory that we have during training, the exact randomness that we had during training. And viewing generalization predictors as theories, these held out set bounds are essentially silent. They don't really tell us, if we rerun this procedure, will they continue to perform well? So any satisfactory theory or prediction of generalization in deep learning will necessarily lie between these two extremes. To summarize, our NeurIPS competition and these new frameworks for evaluating generalization measures were actually very impactful. They attracted a lot of great people in the community to think creatively and propose generalization predictors that have not appeared in theory before. And now we need to fill the gap and maybe connect these predictors that worked well to theory. Also, another thing that I highlighted in the previous slide is that at the same time, our NeurIPS competition raised some issues with the evaluation approach. And in my NeurIPS paper, we provided new methodology for evaluating generalization measures based on a notion called distributional robustness that we argue allows you to better capture when these predictors of generalization will fail, when they'll work, and actually will allow you to make progress faster. In our work, we actually also find that no existing methods look strong when evaluating using our criteria of distributional robustness. So there is obviously still huge gap. A lot of exciting research should be done. And if you're interested in this area, feel free to reach out, or if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Now let me transition to the second part of the talk, where I'll be talking about one of my recent papers that appeared at ASTANS on the role of data in fact-based bounds. So here I'll be talking really not about evaluation of generalization measures anymore, but one particular approach that relies on information theoretic terms. So why do we care about fact-based bounds? Well, fact-based bounds are actually one of the few approaches yielding non-fact-based bounds and generalization error for deep learning on real data sets and networks. However, even if they are the best, they're still not tight enough yet, and they cannot explain most phenomena in deep learning, and they cannot do yet, for example, model selection using them. But I think it's generally kind of information theoretic approaches to generalization are very promising and exciting. So in this work, we show that using data, one can significantly tighten fact-based bounds. And actually, further, surprisingly, we show that it may be necessary even to use data to obtain non-vacuous generalization bounds. So for those not familiar with fact-based, let me just quickly introduce one formative theorem. A fact-based bound says that holds for every data distribution D on labeled data and any prior distribution on the predictors. So for example, we may place some prior distribution on our neural networks via placing a distribution on the weights of the networks. So P is usually chosen independently of the data. Fact-based bounds also hold for any predictors Q or learning algorithms that map our training data S to some posterior distribution on the predictors, for example, on the weights again, which we'll call Q. So fact-based bound says that with high probability of renewed draws of the training set, the risk of Q, so such as the error on the new unseen data, will be bounded in terms of the empirical error of Q, so the training error, plus a complexity term that depends on the KL divergence between my posterior Q and my prior Q. So the dominant term in most fact-based bounds is this KL term, the KL divergence between Q and P. When Q learns a lot from the data from S and starts deviating a lot from the prior P, the KL divergence will be large, yielding a loose bound. When Q is close to P in KL divergence, we'll have a tight bound, and our fact-based bound says that the empirical risk is a good approximation of our risk. So the training error is good approximation on error on new and seen data on average. Let me state a few fun facts about fact-based. Fun fact 1, the prior P can actually depend on the data distribution D. And actually one can show that the bound is optimized when in expectation when P equals the expected posterior Q, where the expectation is taken over draws of the training set. Fun fact 2, if empirical risk of Q that depends on all of us is not computed using all of the training set, then the prior P can actually depend on the data not used in the empirical set evaluation. So if this empirical risk term, the first term, only uses some data as not as prime, then P can depend on S prime. And this leads to fun fact 3, which we show in our paper. For subset S prime of all of our training set S that are not used in the empirical risk term, the optimal prior is actually this conditional expectation of the posterior, where we condition on some of the training set S prime. We call this a data-dependent oracle prior. And our exciting new fun fact 4 that we show in our paper is that these data-dependent oracle priors, the ones obtained by conditional expectations, may actually yield non-vacuous bounds when data-independent oracle prior bounds are vacuous. So in this work, we demonstrate a surprising fact that the optimal pack-based bound is a data-dependent bound, even if you know the data distribution. So in our paper, we also put data-dependent oracle priors to the test on stochastic gradient descent trained deep neural networks with Gaussian priors and posteriors. We obtained state-of-the-art non-vacuous bounds to improve quite a bit numerically on previous state-of-the-art bounds. We also describe how to estimate optimal data-dependent priors in the fixed variance case using extra data. And we also show how coupling this prior to the posterior using some of the data, may actually be as good as having the data distribution itself empirically, which is also, I think, quite surprising and interesting. So please see our paper for more details, where we report a number of experiments on deep neural networks using data-dependent oracle priors, and also we proposed a particular kind of self-bounded learning algorithm that minimizes a data-dependent pack-based bound directly. That's it. Ačiū labai, kad klausėte. Jeigu turite klausimų, mielai atsakysiu. Gero susitikimo ir gerų kitų kalbų. Okay.
Ačiū, Gintarė. Taip, jeigu turit klausimų mūsų speakeriam, tai galite rašyti į YouTube, mes pabandysim perduoti. Ir jeigu norit paskaityti vieną iš paperių, kurie buvo šiandien pristatyti, taip pat po parašymų bus pristatymai. Yeah, I switched to English one more time. Okay. Yeah, so I want to represent our fifth speaker, Povilas Gudžius, and his team from Vilnius University. And they are presenting a very interesting topic, deep learning-based object recognition in multispectral satellite imagery for real-time applications. Okay, and Paula sent us 2 videos. And I want to show you both of them.
So application is important, but what does
sorry, not that video. No, yeah, this one, first one.
Hello and good afternoon, dear AI Lithuania colleagues. My name is Povilas Gudžius, and I represent a research team from Vilnius University Institute of Data Science and Digital Technologies, Cognitive Computing Group. A lot of fancy names, hopefully producing some fancy research. But I'm here to introduce you to the research paper that we have published this year. A fascinating research paper, in my opinion, with the name of Deep Learning-Based Object Recognition in Multi-Spectral Satellite Imagery for Real-Time Applications. So this paper has been published in Springer Nature, Machine Vision and Application Scientific Journal, June this year. And why I believe this is very unique piece of research is because it covers 3 separate disciplines, or even research fields, if you may. And these 3 disciplines are remote sensing, which is satellite imagery to be more specific, So how can we take pictures of high resolution of planet Earth from more than 200 kilometers up in lower Earth orbit and basically produce a not distorted imagery, how we can process it? That's one piece of discipline. The big piece, which is the focus of our research, is machine learning based object object recognition or machine learning based computer vision. And the third discipline that also touches on this in this research paper, which is an application of these two technologies, is algorithmic trading of financial services industry players, so hedge funds. So how do hedge funds use imagery from high up in the lower Earth orbit, use machine learning tools to deploy those signals in their algorithmic trading engines to be able to either make markets or obviously place financial buy or sell signals. So that's what is this whole research all about. Now, hello and good afternoon.
And the second video continues here.
So application is important, but what does this research paper bring for the science community? So we introduced 5 different scientific discoveries in a way that addresses the big problems of this application. First one is accuracy. So doing it manually or it's too slow, and doing it in current computer vision techniques is not accurate enough. And also speed. So algorithmic trading is latency sensitive use case, and current computer vision techniques, just because the one satellite image is like 100 square kilometers in size, it's fairly slow to process that imagery. So our research focused on these 2 cohorts or problems, prediction and speed. Now, and prediction accuracy and speed. Now, what we have introduced with our research, we propose a fully convolutional neural network (FCN) network architecture that is optimized for fast and accurate object recognition and multispectral satellite imagery. Now, implementing these 5 different scientific research advancements, we were able to show that our proposed FCN exceeds human-level performance with state-of-the-art 97.67% accuracy rate, which is mind-blowing accuracy, which is better than any other methods proposed to date. And it's also applicable through multiple sensors and is generalizable across different sceneries. So whether it's urban area or parking lot or any other area, that model can perform equally well. In addition to the accuracy metric, because we were able to produce a computationally light architecture, it delivered a 5 times better improvement in training time, so the time it takes to train up the model, as well as the really fast prediction. Both of these things, accuracy again and training and prediction speed, is very, very important for this particular latency sensitive application. So to summarize these 5 improvements on this paper, first one, we introduced the fully convolutional neural network architecture that produced this accuracy and speed results, state of the art. Secondly, we introduced a methodology of assessing the computational complexity of neural network, and that is applicable not just FCNs, for many other neural networks as well. And we were able to extrapolate the correlation between the, obviously, computational complexity in gigaflops and prediction speed, so that you can iterate and optimize for lighter neural architectures, faster neural architectures in the future. That was number 2 scientific significant research results. Number 3 was an investigation on how does network depth help with different types of feature extraction problems in that particular satellite imagery data set. Number 4 was how do we process that data. So we introduced the concept of pixel frame sequencing that helped to improve and avoid the corner cases of the data set and improve the results. And fifth of all, we tested the results on different processor architectures, on CPUs, GPUs, and TPUs, tensor processing units by Google. We were able to distinguish the speed performance differentials over there, and obviously we compared the results there. So these are 5 different most important scientific research findings: new architecture, complexity measurement, network depth and feature extraction, pixel flame frequency, and then speed testing. So because of all these 5, we were able to successfully publish this research in the this research paper. And together with this published research, we also open sourced our training set. So the research field is lacking because there are not that many open source training sets for this particular data set of satellite imagery. So we actually spent more than 350 professional annotators' work hours to produce this training set, and we open sourced and we published that together with the research, so that it's a way of giving back to the community and ensuring the further development of the scientific field. So all in all, we were able to publish in a Springer Nature journal that focuses particularly for that type of applications, which is machine vision and applications, in this case algorithmic trading. This research paper was featured in fintech journals and newsletters, for example, Bloomberg Tech Monthly, as one of the promising research papers for financial industry players. And also we received quite a few Twitter followers on that regards, and also other endorsements, not because of just scientific discovery of this, but also the practical impact and practical implications for industry of algorithmic trading, particularly relevant to where I'm right now, in the center of hedge funds in the world, New York, and we are very pleased with the results we were able to achieve this year with this paper. So, all in all, I wanted to thank you all for listening to me, and hope you find this research paper of deep learning-based object recognition and multispectral satellite imagery for real-time applications useful, interesting, multidisciplinary, and hopefully worth the nomination. Thanks all, greetings from New York, and all the best. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Paulas. Very interesting paper and presentation. Thank you very much. So if you have questions for Paulas or other our speakers, you can write them on YouTube, and all the papers, if you want to check architecture, example of a Paulas paper, so you can find that on our event description. Okay, and this is our last presentation, and this paper is by Tadas Baltrušaitis, a researcher at Microsoft, and it's have very interesting name: Fake it until you make it, face analysis in the wild using synthetic data alone. So this paper was represented in International Conference on Computer Vision.
Hello everyone, my name is Tadas Baltrušaitis and I lead the Human Synthetics team in Microsoft Mixed Reality Cambridge. And today I'll talk to you about a work entitled Bake It Till You Make It, Face Analysis in the Wild Using Synthetic Data Alone. So, first of all, why want to use synthetic data to train your machine learning models rather than going out in the real world and collecting real data? Well, it allows you to have an unprecedented amount of control. You can create edge cases you want. You can create images of people just wearing glasses or never wearing glasses or wearing shades, for example. You can place people in particular environments and scenarios you want to model. It allows you great flexibility over the data you generate. It also comes with great quality ground truth associated with it. It will be clean and consistent and otherwise impossible to label. For example, asking a person to annotate per pixel labels for segmentation it's a task a person can do, but it's really, really laborious. But if you ask them to annotate, for example, service normal information, that's something that humans just cannot do. But using synthetic data, you can tackle that problem. Finally, synthetic data allows you to create data that is less biased, more diverse, and can lead to better generalization and fairness of your machine learning models. And also it does not come with legal and copyright considerations that crawled web data might, which is commonly used in academia to tackle face analysis problems. So given all of these great benefits of synthetic data, why isn't the academic world and industry using it more to tackle face analysis problems? Well, the conventional wisdom tells us that you can't just use synthetic data. You need to mix it with real data. You can only use synthetic data for pre-training, or you need to perform some sort of domain adaptation. However, in our work, we are the first ones to show that you can use just synthetic data alone without any explicit domain adaptation, without any upreeling or mixing with real, to achieve really great results for face analysis tasks. So how does one achieve that? So let's jump right in. Here are examples of some images generated by our synthetic face framework, together with ground truth annotations on the right. So you can see that we can get pixel-perfect labels of things like facial landmarks, semantic segmentation masks, surface normals. And you can also see that we can generate very diverse range of individuals using our synthetic framework. So how does one generate that? We use classical computer graphics techniques, so there's no machine learning as such in order to generate these images. And we basically use visual effects at scale to generate imagery of diverse individuals. So we start with a template face to which we add identity. So we have a data set of 500 face scans that we processed and registered and built a parametric model of a face from. So these faces do not exist. They're purely sampled from our parametric face model using a Gaussian mixture model. Now, we want faces to have expressions. So we have an expression model and an expression library that we captured using markerless motion capture system, in-house markerless motion capture system that allows us to capture expression blend shapes and pose joints that we can replay on different identities. And having access to this expression library allows us to create really sort of great expressive faces in our data. Next, we add texture to our faces. We sample from a library of textures that were cleaned by artists to remove facial hair, hairnets, and noise that results from scanning faces. In addition to just having an albedo texture, we also add some displacement to model subtle wrinkling and pore level detail. So putting it all together, we get really highly realistic images of faces. Now, we don't want to just render bald head and vary those hairstyles in terms of whether the grey is hair, whether it's dyed, what color of the hair it is. And we used a lot of artist effort to create these hair grooms. Now, also want to dress the faces. So we have a large library of upper body clothing and accessories. Here's an example of a single identity sort of being dressed in the library of our clothing. Things like headwear, glasses, facewear, etc. Now, once we've assembled a human, we want to place them in a scene. So we used high dynamic range imagery to place people in different scenes and to provide background imagery. And this is hugely important because the way your face is illuminated changes the image properties completely. And it allows us to create really diverse data by using this sort of simple technique of high dynamic range imagery. For example, on the image on the right, you see how hugely the appearance of the same individual is affected by just placing them in different lighting conditions. Now that we've sort of put everything together, we can render a big, diverse data set of facial imagery. So I hope you can appreciate the diversity of the imagery we create in terms of lighting, in terms of hairstyles, hair color, skin tones, face shapes, and expressions. So the dataset also comes with various ground truth annotations that we can use to train machine learning models with. So let's jump into some examples of use cases. First, we can train sparse landmark detection networks. So we use just a very classical off-the-shelf ResNet 34 for this task without any pre-training, and just use synthetic data to train it. And this is a very sort of classical standard face analysis task in literature. And the goal is to detect various points on the face of outline of the eyebrow, of the nose, of lips, of the jawline. In order to compare to real-world approaches, we also train a label adaptation network because what synthetic data annotates is slightly different to what a human typically would annotate. The best example of that is the jawline. Synthetic data would just x-ray through the jaw to sort of get the actual location of the jawline, whereas the human would annotate it in image space. So both of these annotations are correct, but they're just different. So we need a label adaptation network to allow us to evaluate on real data. And sort of during that evaluation, we can see that training on synthetic data is better than training only on real data when we use the ResNet 34 network. And we perform sort of very favorably compared to state-of-the-art approaches in this task that would tune specifically for landmark detection, whereas we use just a simple off-the-shelf network. Another task we can tackle is base parsing or semantic segmentation. So you can see here a model trained purely on synthetic data, able to segment faces, and you can see that it's even able to get individual hair strands. Another task that would be really difficult to tackle using real data is dense landmark tracking. So we can ramp up the number of landmarks we track to over 600 very easily when using synthetic data, because we can just arbitrarily choose what we want to track, and we don't need to perform any reannotation. Another task we can tackle using synthetic data alone is eye tracking in head-mounted display imagery of eyes. This is a hugely important problem to tackle in virtual and augmented reality settings. So we can, again, just take a simple off-the-shelf network and train semantic segmentation on landmark detection networks and generalize well to real data. Hopefully, sort of all of these examples convince you of the benefits of synthetic data and that we can use synthetic data alone to train facial analysis tasks. And for more information, please visit our website. And we've also released a version of our dataset publicly of 100,000 images with ground truth annotations that you can check out. And thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Tadas. And this was our last presentation. So we present today 7 papers from different kind of fields: protein structure, computer vision, classical deep learning. And yeah, so if you want to know which of these papers win this year's award, so we welcome and want to invite you to on December 28th and Vilnius University Mathematical Information Faculty. We organize these AI awards. So this was be a live event on the 7 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the evening. And so see you then. Have a nice evening and until next time. Bye everyone.